Hey there, let me ask you something. What if I told you that almost everything you learned about American history in school is just half the story? Presidents, wars, and monuments, yeah, those are important. But the real story is missing. The voices of the people, the workers, women, Native Americans, enslaved Africans, are mostly ignored. Howard Zinn's book, A People's History of the United States, is exactly about that. It flips history upside down, showing us the untold, shocking, and inspiring side of America. Today we're diving deep into the history you didn't learn in school. So sit tight, because this might change the way you see America forever. So why is Zinn's book different? Because he writes history from the perspective of ordinary people who suffered, resisted, and sometimes triumphed quietly. From Columbus to modern America, Zinn exposes the struggles and resistance of those who were ignored by textbooks. And here's the kicker. These stories aren't just facts. They're lessons about courage, resilience, and the power of ordinary people to challenge injustice. Era 1. Columbus, Native Americans. Let's start with 1492. Columbus discovered America, but for Native Americans it was a disaster. Millions of people were killed by violence and disease. Their lands were stolen, their cultures destroyed. Zinn writes, "The story of conquest is often celebrated, but it hides centuries of suffering. For example, the Taino people in the Caribbean. Entire populations wiped out within decades. Think about it. What we celebrate as exploration was actually oppression for those who lived there first." Reflection question. Imagine celebrating someone's arrival while millions around them suffered. How does that change your view of history? Era 2. Slavery, Civil War. Next, slavery. This is brutal, but it's history we must face. Enslaved Africans were treated as property, forced to build the nation's wealth. Families were torn apart, and yet they resisted, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in bold rebellions. During the Civil War, ordinary people risked everything for justice, not for glory, not for medals, but for freedom itself. Zinn reminds us, freedom isn't given, it's demanded, fought for, and often paid with blood and sacrifice. Story highlight. Harriet Tubman risking her life repeatedly to free hundreds of enslaved people through the Underground Railroad. Reflection question. If history hides these struggles, how can we truly understand the price of freedom? Era 3. Industrialization, labor movements. The 19th and early 20th century brought industrialization. Machines, factories, railroads. Wealth exploded, but ordinary workers suffered. Children worked long hours. Accidents were common. Wages were almost nothing.
Zinn shows how strikes, protests, and riots shaped America. People fought for fair pay, safe conditions, and dignity. And yes, some paid with their lives, like the Ludlow Massacre, where striking miners and their families were killed. History books often skip these stories. Zinn says, these are the real battles that built America. Reflection question. Do you think the power of ordinary people can outweigh the influence of the elite?
Era 4. Women's rights, civil rights. Women fought for decades to vote, work, and be recognized as equals. African Americans endured segregation, lynching, and systemic oppression, but they never gave up. Zinn highlights heroes often forgotten: activists, teachers, marchers, and everyday citizens who challenged injustice daily. For instance, the 1963 March on Washington, ordinary people demanding equality, changing the nation forever. And women like Susan B. Anthony risked arrest, ridicule, and violence for a simple but revolutionary demand: the right to vote. Reflection question. How many times in history have ordinary people quietly created the biggest changes? Era 5. Vietnam War, modern America. Now let's fast forward. Vietnam War. An entire generation of Americans exposed government lies, manipulation, and hidden agendas. Students, families, soldiers, they protested, resisted, and demanded accountability. Zinn captures voices often ignored: anti-war activists, whistleblowers, and people who refused to stay silent. From civil rights to anti-war protests, the common thread is clear: Real change is driven by ordinary people, not politicians or generals. Story highlight: Kent State shootings, students protesting, lives lost, yet movement continued. Reflection question: would you have dared to protest against an injustice you believed in, even when it was dangerous? Era 6. Industrial America. After the Civil War, America began to rebuild, not just its cities, but its entire identity. The country was transforming from a nation of farmers to a powerhouse of factories, machines, and steel. The Industrial Revolution created millionaires, and also millions of broken backs. Railroads stretched across the continent, mines dug deep into the earth, and factories rose like iron giants. Yet, for the people working inside those factories, life was far from the American dream. Men, women, even children, worked 12 to 16 hours a day for barely enough to survive. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of machines never stopped. Howard Zinn described this period not as a story of innovation, but as a story of struggle. A time when wealth rose but equality fell. Big names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan became the symbols of power. They built industries, but also built walls between the rich and the poor. Behind every skyscraper, there were thousands of tired hands and hungry stomachs. And from this suffering, a new spirit began to rise. The labor movement. Strikes, protests, and unions started forming. People wanted not just jobs, but dignity. The Haymarket Affair of 1886, the Homestead Strike, and the Pullman Strike all became symbols of the people's fight against corporate greed. Howard Zinn reminds us that this era wasn't about progress alone. It was about the price of progress, the blood, sweat, and hope of ordinary people who built a nation they could barely afford to live in. Era 7, the Great Depression and World War II. The 20th century began with pride and ended in pain. After World War I, America was powerful, rich, and confident, but beneath the surface, the system was cracking. In 1929, the Great Depression hit like a storm. Factories shut down, banks collapsed, and millions of Americans lost everything: jobs, homes, and dreams. Families waited in breadlines, children starved, and despair spread faster than any virus. Howard Zinn's perspective cuts through the glorified history. He doesn't focus on presidents or businessmen, but on the people who suffered in silence. Farmers watched their crops die, workers lined up for relief, and many wondered if the land of opportunity had ever really been theirs. Then came World War II, a turning point. The war created jobs, ended the Depression, and gave America its global power. But Zinn asks a question few dared to: who benefited the most? While soldiers risked their lives overseas, corporations at home made fortunes from military contracts. Zinn's lens shows how patriotism often masked profit, and how wars were not just about freedom, but about economics and control. Still, the war also sparked new changes. Women entered the workforce, Black Americans demanded rights, and the idea of equality began to grow louder. The nation was changing again. This time, not with machines, but with voices. Key lessons: reflection. So what's the lesson from Zinn? History is not just a story of the rich and powerful. It's the story of ordinary people, resisting, suffering, struggling, and slowly changing the world. Every strike, protest, rebellion, or act of courage shaped America far more than any single president or law. Next time you read history, ask yourself, whose story is missing? Whose voice is silenced? And what can we learn from their courage? If this video shocked you, inspired you, or made you think differently about history, comment below. Tell us, which untold story moved you the most? Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States is not just a book, it's a wake-up call. It reminds us that real history is made by ordinary people, the ones who